So, chapter 17, the yoga of the threefold faith, and we can call it the art of sattvic living, because Bhagwan describes various aspects of our life which can be thought about within the context of the three gunas, as we have learned in the earlier chapter, that the gunas form a kind of framework within which we can think about our uh, prakritic nature, as it were, the material nature which is subject to the three gunas. In this case, Bhagwan is going to kind of talk about the idea of faith in relationship to the scriptures. And not only that, how the faith then kind of relates to certain aspects of our life and living. And this is in response to Arjuna's question about uh, what kind of faith is it if you uh, practice something without with full faith, but not according to the ordinance of the scriptures. So we'll look at the logic of this whole chapter within the context of what we have talked about earlier on. But here are the themes in chapter number 17. So first of all, as usual, we will look at the logic and the flow of thought so far, and a brief recap as to where we are within the kind of context of the pathway of the Bhagavad Gita and where it has reached so far. And in this chapter, we start off by Arjuna's question and Bhagwan's response about the threefold faith. Then Bhagwan goes on to talk about the three varieties of food and the three types of sacrifices, followed by the austerities of the body, speech, and mind, and also the threefold austerities. He also then describes the three types of charity, dhanam, and finally, the section is on perfection through Om Tat Sat. So we may wonder why Bhagwan has brought this Om Tat Sat towards the end. And of course, Bhagwan is a master teacher. He wants to make sure that we understand what the scriptures are talking about in this very summary statement of Om Tat Sat, which I'll explain later. So the next thing is then, of course, what will we do now? And how are we going to translate this knowledge into our day-to-day life and existence? So let's start by just looking at the overview of the Bhagavad Gita, the setting of the teaching. And this, we are now in the third set of the 6 chapters, which talks about the divine and the relationship between the human and the divine, Purusha and Prakriti. And as we know that the first 6 chapters deal with the individual, the Jiva. The second set of 6 chapters deal with the divine. And the third set of chapters deal with the relationship between the human and the divine and how we can understand that the essence of the Jiva is the essence of the Ishvara, which is really nothing but the substratum of all existence, which is Brahman. So in chapter number 13, we had this switching of the channel, as it were, towards understanding the relationship between the human and the divine, the transactional and the transcendental or the eternal, and how Bhagwan describes this relationship between the field and the knower of the field. And field by field, he means the body and the mind and the intellect. And the knower of the field, of course, is that which provides the sentiency to this body, mind, intellect, which makes us to experience things and to be aware of things and to carry out our actions and transactions in life. The next chapter was about the three gunas, description of Prakriti as the play of the gunas. So we can describe Prakriti as having these attributes or this way in which they function. And it is really a way of describing everything in the creation. So that if you take this framework, we can describe anything. So in this case, Bhagwan is even going to describe to us 3 types of food based on the gunas and how the gunas themselves become the way in which we are going to look at our inner transformation and how we have to move the texture of our gunas from the rajasic and the tamasic towards that which is sattvic, and then eventually even transcend all the 3 gunas to reach that which is the substratum. So remember, this is the context in which Bhagwan has been talking about the three guna, and here also it becomes relevant, but there is a different dimension Bhagwan adds in answer to Arjuna's question. And chapter number 15 was talking about the Supreme Being and how Purushottama and the manifestation as Jiva, and how the Supreme Being is the ultimate kind of destination which we have to reach out to. Chapter number 16, which we saw last month, was about the divine and the devilish expressions. Again, the whole idea is that how do we kind of distinguish between that which is the divine and that which is the kind of demoniacal or devilish, and how we can recognizing what these attributes are, even in terms of the gunas, in terms of the qualities of our being, and how we manifest them in our lives. How can we make those distinctions so that we begin to change these from the demoniacal or devilish towards that which is the divine? Because the whole purpose, remember, is to move from the first stage of our spiritual journey, which is really about purification, and then to move on to that which is called absorption through contemplation and meditation. And unless we are able to kind of have a very still and focused mind, we are not going to be able to become absorbed in the way in which meditation teaches us to do. And therefore, the primary kind of requirement for any spiritual practice, advanced spiritual practice, is we need to have that kind of purification. And therefore, Bhagwan is describing all the different manners in which we can look at the relationship between the divine and that which is the material Purusha and Prakriti, so that we can know which direction to move towards. And in this chapter, Bhagwan is talking about the faith as the foundation of spiritual life. As we know, without faith, there is no kind of spiritual life. But faith in what? That is the question. And Bhagwan is explaining to us in relationship to faith, how that faith expresses itself in the various dimensions of our life and how it needs to express itself in order for us to have this uh, directionality in terms of our spiritual progression so that we reach the destination as Bhagwan has been taking us through all the previous chapters. So, how to move to sattvic faith and then to the eternal really is the proposition of this chapter, and we will go into detail of that in a minute. And of course, the final chapter, chapter number 18, which is a long chapter, which we're going to take up next month, is about liberation through renunciation. It is a culmination and summary of the knowledge and guidance given to us by Bhagwan and what Arjuna then decides to do, given all the knowledge and guidance which Bhagwan has given him. So let's look at the logic and the flow of thought so far, and a brief recap as to where we are coming from in terms of the thought flow which has taken place. And we are going to look at the gunas again, just to remind ourselves what is their place in spiritual life. And here we start thinking about the gunas. These are the attributes of nature, and they determine the functioning of all the elements of nature, both living and non-living. In other words, the materiality which we call Prakriti is subject to the attributes. And we know this, the attributes are really, if we look at the attributes and try to describe the characteristics of any living or non-living thing, we can say, yeah, this is sattvic, this is rajasic, this is tamasic. This person temperamentally can also be described as sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And we see that, this is related to how we function in our life depending on our temperament, which is determined really by not only the mixture of the gunas, but the preponderance of the gunas in each one of us. Because we all have a mixture of the gunas, but there is one guna which will be predominantly available throughout our life and living. And these gunas also are attributes of the jiva and the body and the mind and the intellect, and they function according to their nature. And of course, we know that the primary thing which we have to kind of consider in terms of our spiritual journey is the gunas of our vasanas, and the vasanas are the subliminal impressions which we have gathered through all these lives. And those are the ones which are the drivers of our experience in this life, combined with the unfolding karma, which is called the prarabdha karma, and therefore the vasanas according to the gunas, and the prarabdha karma, which is the unfolding circumstances of our life in terms of the various things which we experience in life, now create the framework within which we can think about our life at the moment. And of course, the whole spiritual journey is about what? It is about inner transformation. And that inner transformation is nothing but, first of all, to adjust the proportion of the gunas and take it to our sattvic way of living. So the jiva experience is a functioning of the gunas as experiencing arising in the body, mind, intellect, and then awareness, activity, and apathy are experienced through the play of the gunas and binds through these. Remember, when we talk about liberation, we can also talk about bondage, because liberation can only be attained if we have now untied the ties that bind us. And we know that in the chapter number 15, we talked about, how the gunas are the ones which bind us in different ways. And what the guidance is to look at each one of our ties which are binding us to this way in which we are living. And if we see that the rajasic and the tamasic gunas are primarily the ones which are binding us in various different ways to the things and the beings and the happenings of the world, we need to start thinking about how am I going to shift the balance of the rajas and the tamas towards sattva. And this is called awareness, which is the sattvic awareness, which is enlightened awareness, full of knowledge, which is then going to take us towards the final destination of liberation. So Jiva has become mistakenly identified with these experiences and becomes the doer and enjoyer of all these experiences, because the Jiva are constantly experiencing this play of the gunas. This play of the gunas gives this sense of doership and enjoyership, and all that is mistaken to be me and mine. And that is where the fundamental mistake is being made about our own identity. And we mistake ourselves to be this individual jiva who is experiencing all these things. And of course, the human purpose really is what? Is to attain liberation through the purification of the mind. In other words, increasing the dominance of the sattvic guna, and to establish ourselves in the truth by means of contemplation and meditation. Of course, just to remind ourselves that we are talking from the Advaita Vedanta point of view, and this has got a kind of slightly different way of looking at things as we move along in our spiritual journey. So purification followed by absorption. Purification is turning our nature towards the sattvic guna, and to make sure that that purification is then allowing us to sit down and contemplate for long hours and to meditate and to absorb the mind in that which is the highest consciousness. And it is a very kind of coherent, logical philosophy, very practically given to us by Bhagwan. And of course, this is what he gives Arjuna as the guidance to reach that highest state of liberation. But in the meantime, of course, Arjuna's question was about what should I do? And what should I do is not just a question of answering, okay, you go ahead and do this. It is about knowing what is the inner purpose and inner meaning and inner values which we have to shift in order for us to know exactly what we are supposed to be doing. So choices are based on our values, and the values are related to the meaning and purpose of life. And therefore, it requires a total orientation of our mind and our intellect and our vision and our awareness to that which is the spiritual, in order for us to make decisions which are going to be based on that vision, even kind of thinking about what am I going to eat today? And Bhagwan is going to mention to us what is a sattvic food and what is not a sattvic food. And therefore, those decisions are going to come from where? They are going to only come from having this vision, this spiritual vision, which is going to be our guide. So, references to the gunas previously, as we have seen, really is that these uh, are mentioned in chapter number 2, right at the very beginning. At these, the Vedas deal with the three attributes, and the whole idea is to go beyond the gunas because we are trying to go beyond this material nature which we have taken to be ourselves. And Bhagwan says to Arjuna, free yourself from the pairs of opposites, ever remain in sattva, which is the sattvic guna, goodness, freed from all thoughts of acquisition and preservation, and be established in the self. See, even in one verse, we can make out the journey, we can make out the destination, we can make out the methodology by which this is going to be done. And here, Bhagwan again is talking about the sattva guna. And sattva guna means that we are moving towards the sattvic way of being in our life, and how that is going to take us towards becoming established in the self. And if we see that the freedom from all sorts of acquisition and preservation is about the rajasic and the tamasic guna. So we are freeing ourselves from the rajasic and the tamasic and moving to that which is the sattvic guna. So then in chapter number 3 as well, Bhagwan says, all actions are performed in all cases merely by the qualities in nature, gunas. Everything is performed by the gunas. It is just the gunas playing in the material world, including our body, mind, intellect, which makes all these things to appear as if, you know, this is the reality, this is how things are functioning, this is who I am, and I become deluded by saying, I am the doer of all these things. Whereas really in reality, Bhagwan says it's the gunas playing in nature. It's nothing to do with you. You are that which is beyond the gunas. So this is what Bhagwan is telling us in chapter number 3. And of course, immediately he follows by saying that he who knows the truth about the divisions and the qualities and the function, he who knows that the gunas are the senses move amidst the gunas as object, he is not attached. And of course, we know the me and the mine is about ego identity and an attachment. And if we are to move beyond that, we have to move beyond the gunas. The logic is quite simple here. So then coming back to a kind of way in which we have to think about these gunas is really that we are thinking about uh, the pathway, the path of karma yoga, and what it says, swabhava. Each one of us has got a certain swabhava. And if you ask any question to yourself and to say, what is the swabhav of this friend or this family member? At once, something comes to your mind. This person is like this, like this, like this. And actually, what you're describing is the gunas which this person has, and that is determining the temperament of that guna. And you say, this person's swabhav is like this. And the swabhav is nothing but an expression of the vasanas, which are all the past impressions which have been gathered by that person. And therefore, swabhav is where we start off. And then what we have to do is to understand what our swadharma is and taking the vasanas and modifying our intention and our attitude and our belief through buddhi yoga. We perform our dharma, and then what happens is that we discover our real nature, our Swarupa. So remember this sequence, and I've mentioned this many times before, Swabhava to Swadharma to Swarupa. This is the track. This is the transformation track. This is where our Purusharth is going to be. Using the Buddhi, we are going to translate, transform the Vasanas, which comprise of this complex mixture of these gunas, and take them towards the Sattvic guna. And through that inner transformation, we realize the self through this deep state of meditation. And then again, reminding ourselves of the ego operating system, how it is functioning at the moment, is that all the past conditioning, intention, belief, attitude, working through the body, mind, intellect, through the sensation, feeling, and thought, gives all the experiences which we are having. It drives us toward doing things in the world, actions, and then we receive the reactions from those in terms of the consequences of our action and also the consequences of our experiences. And all these come together to create more impressions which feed back into the vasanas. So this again is important for us to remember, but because when we are going about our spirituality moment to moment, day to day, and trying to live a spiritual life, this picture should be borne in mind so that when we look at our actions and our reactions, we should consider, where is this coming from? What kind of vasana is operating at the moment? Which particular attitude am I having in terms of this object or this person? This becomes our day to day spirituality. Bearing this awareness always in our mind will allow for this transformation to take place. And this is the ego individual functioning in this way. And of course, the whole point is that we have to intervene somewhere. Because if we keep on doing the same things again and again, we'll reach not anywhere, but we'll reach back to the same place again and again. If you don't change anything, nothing changes. The outcome will remain the same. Therefore, the whole idea of spirituality is to uh, exert the purushat, the self effort, in order to intervene at either the body level, the mind level, or the intellect level. And through that intervention, we begin to change the vasanas and the texture of the vasanas through this conscious intervention. And therefore, it takes us into a transformation, and that will eventually take us to the purpose of human existence, which is liberation. So, Swabhava. Now, let's think about vasanas. And here is a table to show the kind of texture of the vasanas. So, what the scriptures describe, we can think of three dimensions primarily of our life: the physical dimension, the relational dimension, which is called the loka vasanas, physical is the deha vasana, and the conceptual, which is based on the knowledge, which is called shastra vasana. And each one can be of a tamasic or a rajasic or a sattvic nature. So, for example, if the physical dehavasana is tamasic, then you don't really care about the body, you don't care about regulation of your diet or your nutrition or your food, you don't exercise, you don't really care about the body. Body is just another piece which is available to me. And on the other hand, if you look at the sattvic part of it, then the body mind intellect becomes like your primary vehicle for your liberation. And therefore, you treat it accordingly. You know this is the most precious equipment and the vehicle you have, and therefore you treat it in the best manner possible so that it lasts for a long time and allows you enough time for you to attain whatever you need to attain in this life, which is really what we've been talking about, the purpose of existence, which is liberation. And relationally, again, loka vasanas, it means that we are in relationship to the world, and not only the physical objects, but also primarily the human beings. And that for that loka vasana, for example, in the rajasic manner, others people exist for my own sake. And we know that the egocentric way is the rajasic way of behaving. And therefore, I'm always interested in what is me, what is mine, and what is of interest to me rather than the other. And therefore, my focus is always towards me. And therefore, when I think about other things and other people, others exist for my sake. It is a very much a selfish way of looking at life. And the third one is the conceptual. So Shastravasana, which says, okay, I can get knowledge about various different things, but it will be for my sake. If I look at it from the Rajasic point of view, but from the point of view of the Sattvic, then knowledge becomes very important. And we'll come to this point later on when Bhagwan answers Arjuna's question. Is knowledge is very important, but which knowledge? And where are you going to look for that knowledge really becomes very important when we're talking about the sattvic orientation towards Shastravasana and how to develop the Shastravasana. This is what is important for us. Now, if you look at this table, what we are trying to do essentially in terms of sattvification of our svabhava is taking the tamasic and the rajasic elements of our vasanas and transforming them into the sattvic vasana. So if I start with I don't really care about my body, I have to change my belief, I have to change my attitude, I have to change my intention so that I now begin to think of this body as the vehicle for my emancipation, my liberation, and therefore my whole orientation towards my body will change. So you can see how by changing belief, attitude, and intention, we can transform ourselves from the tamasic and the rajasic towards the sattvic vasanas. So in relation to that, we know that the kshetra which Bhagwan talks about in relationship to the kshetrajna in chapter number 13, he talks about these modifications and the sadhana which we have to do in order to attain this purification. And in this particular reference, he talks about the qualities, the 36 qualities which we have to cultivate within ourselves, which are nothing but the expressions of a sattvic temperament. So you can see that the gunas are really important in the sense that they form the basis not only of our analysis of our temperament, but also to ensure that we understand which direction we have to travel. And cultivating of this quality, what is the means? Knowledge again. Where are we going to get this knowledge? From the Shastra. This is what Bhagwan is going to tell us. So, how to cultivate these qualities? And of course, I always bring this in one way or the other, conscious spiritual living. How is this going to be done? The four A's, the four B's, the four C's, and the four D's. I'm sure you know this by heart, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it. But really, this is a very good framework for conscious living. And if you would really want interested in self-transformation, inner transformation, take this framework to change the things which you want to change. It's not going to happen automatically. A lot of effort is required. And at the heart of this effort is really self awareness, alertness, attention, and then taking action according to the knowledge which we have gained. So this is how we are going to go about cultivating the qualities. And as we know that again, to remind ourselves that the ego operating system, we have to go to the dharma operating system, then to the God operating system. Again, I've told this you many times. And again, the first stage is purification, sattvification, and the second stage is self-realization. And the whole movement described in the Bhagavad Gita is going from the ego operating system to the dharma operating system by means of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and then eventually including jnana yoga and meditation, we now reach the state of realization, and then the whole kind of balance shift towards realization. So in terms of the gunas, Bhagwan had already described to us in chapter number 14 that the self-centered dwelling in the self, unswerving, unconcerned, how is that going to be done? The one who has transcended the gunas is actually going to function in the way in which Bhagwan has described here. And these are the perfected ones, the ones who have gone beyond the three gunas, and therefore they become centered in the self, completely non-judgmental, non-reactive, non-active in the sense of attaining the highest um, sense of self. And that self, when the identity is located in Brahman, then everything changes. And this is what Bhagwan is describing to us here, is that once we have attained the sattvic transformation, then to go beyond that sattvic transformation will bring us to this point whereby perfection is attained through this way. So this is the perfected ones. And of course, all these things are to be borne in mind as we go along in our spiritual journey. And each time we have to remind ourselves what is happening in the moment, what is my experience in the moment, what is the choice which I'm making now, why am I making that choice, and how can I make a different choice based on a different belief, different attitude, different intention. That is really the way in which Bhagavad Gita is giving us the guidance. Is if you function in that way, eventually will reach a point of self-realization. So you remember in the last chapter, um, right at the very end, Bhagwan says, A man who is liberated from these three gates of darkness, O Konteya, practices what is good for him and thus goes to the supreme goal. He who, having cast aside the ordinance of the scriptures, acts under the impulse of desire, attains neither perfection, nor happiness, nor the supreme goal. So Bhagwan has brought the ordinance of the scriptures right into the picture towards the end of the last chapter. He says, therefore, let the scriptures be your authority in determining what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Having known what is said in the commandments of the scripture, you should act here in this world. Remember, Arjun's original question was what? Tell me what to do. Now Bhagwan is telling him directly what to do and how to do it, and on what basis to make his choices. The choice is going to be made on the authority of the scriptures, which is going to tell him what to do or not to do. And Bhagwan has already laid down a wonderful plan as to how that is going to be acquired and what scriptures are telling us. He has given us a summary of all the Upanishads, bringing them into the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. And not only that, but also giving the practical guidance as to how to live through the Gita. So this is how you should act here in this world. He's telling Arjun, but he's also telling us, because many times we get so confused. What am I supposed to be doing? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing this or that or something else? I'm not sure. And this lack of clarity, this indecision, this wavering of the mind is because we have not yet recognized the authority of the scriptures. And of course, for the spiritual pathway, that is really a very fundamental point, which Bhagwan is also going to emphasize to us in this chapter, as Arjuna begins this chapter by asking this question. Setting aside the ordinance of the scriptures, perform sacrifice with faith. What is their condition, O Krishna? Is it sattva, rajas, or tamas? So Arjuna is asking what here? Think about it. And we've already seen the relationship with the end of chapter number 16 when, Bhagwan talked about the ordinance of the scriptures. And at once Arjun's mind is turning towards the question as to if you're talking about the ordinance of the scriptures, suppose now I perform all my transactions with faith, but I don't take into account the ordinances of the scriptures. Now, what kind of condition is that? Is it sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? So this question really is asking the question about the relationship between faith and the prescription of the scriptures. And what kind of faith is it when the practice, sacrifice, which we call practice, transactional, what the transactions we are doing on a day-to-day basis, based only on faith without the basis in the scriptures? Very interesting question, because it raises the question of what is faith and what do we mean by the scriptures and why should it be based on the authority of the scriptures? So I want to examine this very briefly in terms of these two things, authority of the scriptures and the faith and the relationship between these two things. So first of all, Shabda or Shruti Pramana. Authority of the scriptures or the ordinances of the scriptures can be thought of in terms of Shruti, Shabda, Pramana. Pramana means means of knowledge, knowledge. And in Advaita Vedanta, these pramana are accepted as valid means of knowledge. So question is, what do we mean by valid means of knowledge? Is how do I know what I know? And how do I know that what I know is the truth? This is called a valid means of knowledge. So if somebody says, okay, I imagine this thing and I think that is the truth. Now, is that a valid means of knowledge? Suppose I say I saw something, I imagined it in my mind, and I think that is the truth. That is not considered as a valid means of knowledge because there are certain pramana which are accepted in the scriptures, Advaita Vedanta in particular, we are talking about here, as valid means of knowledge. What are these? First of all, it is pratyaksha, perception. Anumana pramana, upamana, comparison, analogy, arthapati, postulation, presumption, abhava, non-perception, cognitive proof using non-existence. So the non-existence is used as a basis of attaining knowledge, which is also considered as a valid means of knowledge. So here's pratyaksha pramana, and related to pratyaksha pramana is anumana, upamana, arthapati, and abhava. Then the next thing is shabda pramana, scriptural knowledge. So keep this in mind. Pratyaksha pramana, shabda pramana. We can think of it this as two categories. And pratyaksha pramana, of course, is related to the senses, to the mind, to the intellect, whereas shabda pramana is related to the scriptural knowledge, testimony of somebody who has already experienced something and is now uh, kind of putting it down in terms of the scriptures. So, principle in Advaita Vedanta is this, very important to understand and remember. Brahman cannot be an object of perception. Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, cannot be an object of perception, and therefore, Shankaracharya ji says that this principle is not within the scope of perception as it does not have form, color, or any perceptible attribute. And it cannot be the object of our inference, which means Anumana Praman is ruled out as well, and it does not have property to serve any inferential sign, which rules off all the Pratyaksha Pramana. See how the logic is going to follow. Brahman is not an object of perception. Any means of knowledge which is related to perception of an object has to be ruled out. Why? Because Brahman is not an object of perception. And therefore, you can't say, I have seen Brahman, because Brahman is not to be seen. Therefore, to realize Brahman, the only means of knowledge is Shabda Pramana. So that is why Bhagwan is immediately and directly telling Arjun that it is Shabda Praman which is the most important thing, as he has already mentioned in the end of last chapter. So remember that logic about Shabda Praman and Pratyaksha Praman. We have to rule out Pratyaksha Praman because Brahman is not an object of our perception, and therefore we have to rely on Shabda Praman. Shraddha, let's think about Shraddha. And Bhagwan has already talked about Shraddha in the previous chapters. In number 3, he says, those who are constantly practice this teaching of mine, full of faith and without cavilling, they too are freed from action, full of faith. Faith is basis on which this freedom from action is going to take place. Then he goes on to say, the man who is full of faith, who is devoted to it, and who has subdued the senses, obtains this knowledge, and having obtained this knowledge, ere long he goes to the supreme peace. In other words, the final destination is reached by someone who has full faith. Shraddha has to be there. The ignorant, the faithless, the doubting self goes to destruction. There is neither this world nor the other, nor happiness for the doubter. See how faith is so important. And here he says, amongst the yogis who is full of faith, he is the most devout. And Bhagwan says again that endowed with supreme faith, these, in my opinion, are the best in yoga. Supreme faith means we are going to become the best in yoga by having that supreme faith. So, Shraddha, then taking it further, in Vivek Chudamani, in verse number 25, Shankaracharya ji explains what Shraddha is. That by which one understands the import of the scriptures as well as the pregnant words of the advice of the preceptor is called by the wise as Shraddha. So it is not unquestioning blind belief in the word of the teacher or the scripture. The student, in fact, is encouraged to express doubt and question the teacher. Shraddha requires full awareness and attention on the part of the disciple. Full awareness and attention. Coming back to the 4 A's. And remember what Gurudev used to say, express doubt. Don't take the word of the teacher for granted. And he says, don't, uh, you know, look at the teacher and say, oh yeah, he's got a long beard, therefore I can have belief in him. Doubt what the what the teacher is saying. Not doubt in the sense of saying this is wrong, but the doubt which is created because we want to understand something, we want to clarify something, and therefore we have to ask the right questions. So Shraddha requires for us to ask this question with full awareness and attention, and therefore it means Shraddha is combining trust with unwavering attention, and also that there is a freedom to question and to know what the teacher is saying and to question that in order to have this complete clarity in our mind. Because clarity leads to commitment, and commitment leads to realization of the truth. So it's important for us to understand what Shraddha is. Very, very brief kind of description of Shraddha, what Shraddha is. But, we can do a whole session on Shraddha. It's such a wonderful topic. But Shraddha and Shabda Pramana, these are the two things which Bhagwan is talking about here. So faith that is firmly rooted in the scriptures provides the best pathway for purification and liberation. So that is why the ordinance of the scriptures becomes so important. So Arjuna is asking this question, and Bhagwan says, threefold is the faith of the embodied, which is inherent in their nature. So each one of us has got this nature, and that nature is the one which will determine whether it is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And therefore also the faith. The faith is colored by our temperament, and therefore we can say the faith is either sattvic or rajasic or tamasic. And he says here about this. Faith of each is in accordance with his nature. And man consists of his faith. As a man's faith is, so is he. So if I ask you this question, where is your faith? What is your faith? And how is your faith? What are the attributes of your faith? It becomes a vital question for us to answer. Why? Because as my faith, so am I. Why? Because my faith is the basis on which I'm going to make meaning of my life. I'm going to make my values based on that. And my choices and my actions are going to be based on that orientation which the faith is giving me. So, as my faith, so am I in myself and in relationship to the world. So, ask this question of yourself. Where is your faith? What is your faith? So the sattvic or the pure men worship the gods. The rajasic, who are the passionate, they worship the yakshas and the rakshasas. Now, yakshas are the ones which are got the and Kubera is really the chieftain of the yakshas, and he is the keeper of all the wealth in this universe. So the rajasic person is after what? Is after Kanchan, Kamini, and Kirti. Kanchan is wealth, Kamini is all this passion for various different things, and Kirti is name and fame. So Yaksha Kubera is going to give him the wealth, Kanchan. And the Rakshasas, which related to power and passion, that is going to be provided by the Rakshasas. Attainment through this kind of passion, through this power, is through the Rakshasas. So think of this as kind of energies within yourself. And this is a passionate person, full of rajasic energies, is interested in attaining things and holding things, whether it is power, name and fame, wealth, whatever it is. It is, I want to get this because it makes me feel complete. It makes me feel good. And then the tamasika, the dark or the dull, they worship the ghost, pretas, and the host of bhutas and the nature and the spirit. Because their orientation is really towards the world. Bhutas means, the ghost as well. In other words, those things which nobody else can see, but they can see. These are things which, they're interested in, and they're oriented towards the material existence. And this is what their faith is based on, is that I only believe in things which I see. I only believe in what I see, and I'm only interested in things which give me pleasure and are related to indulging the senses. And those men who practice terrific austerities, not enjoined by the scriptures, given to hypocrisy and egoism, impelled by the force of lust and attachment, senselessly torturing all the elements in the body, and me also who dwell within the body, you may know these to be demoniacal resolves. Bhagwan has already told us these demoniacal qualities, and this is in opposition to those people who are not having, this kind of orientation towards sattva. So they don't have the divine qualities, but rather they have got the demoniacal qualities, so that even if they practice austerities, they are given to hypocrisy, egoism, and lust and attachments, and they torture their body in this kind of way. So that has to be ruled out. We don't want any of these, and we don't want any kind of rajasic or tamasic kind of faith. We want that which is the sattvic faith. And then Bhagwan goes on to describe the three varieties of the food, and this I'll go through quite quickly because it kind of, in a sense, that when we talk about food, if you put in the general category of food, it doesn't just mean eating the food. It means all the food which we take in, not only from the mouth as the taster, which is our tongue, but really through all the senses. We can think of the food for our eyes, food for the ears, and so on and so on. And all this becomes like food. What are we taking into ourselves? And everything becomes food. But if we just focus on that which is the food which we eat, that food which increases life, purity, strength, health, joy, and cheerfulness, it brings about, which is savory, oleaginous, substantial, and agreeable, that is called the sattvic food. Question is, why do we need to eat sattvic food? You see how the orientation has to be total. When we talk about purification, instead, it has to be total. So even food comes into the equation. Is that when I look at food, that my belief is that I should have this sattvic food. My attitude is that I will be having this food which is going to be dear to me. It is going to be savory as well as substantial and agreeable. And I like this food because it is going to give me purity and strength and health and joy. Why? Because it turns my mind towards the sattvic. Remember, there is a relationship between the food which we eat and the state of the mind. This is an established fact, is that if I eat certain kind of food, it will bring a lot of rajasic energy within myself. And if I eat sattvic foods, already the mind is calm and quiet, and it allows for me to sit down and meditate. The foods that are bitter, sour, saline, excessively hot, pungent, dry, and burning are like by the rajasic, and they are productive of pain, grief, and disease. Of course, if I want to travel on my spiritual pathway, and I want to avoid all these kind of things because they're going to be producing pain and grief and disease, and I don't want that because I want to keep my body to be in a optimum condition, and that means I have to look after my food which I'm taking into this body. And that which is stale, tasteless, putrid, rotten, refuse, and impure is food like by the tamasic. That is completely out. Stale food. We tend to do that sometimes. We eat a bit of food, put it in the fridge, take it out again, heat it up again, eat a bit more, put it back in the fridge. Actually, we are eating this stale food. That's why we need to kind of think about how can I eat fresh food, not that which is stale or tasteless or whatever it is. We have to think about our diet and what we are eating, how we are even eating it, and then to make sure that this orientation towards sattva is obtained even through food. So sacrifices. Now, sacrifice doesn't just mean, sitting down in a puja and doing that kind of havan or yajna or whatever. Sacrifice really means everything which we transact in our life. Remember, earlier chapter was talking about the number of sacrifices which people do in order for them to reach that which is the highest destination. And sacrifice, in a sense, is about the transactions which we carry out, our actions which we are carrying out even in life in relationship to the world. That sacrifice which is offered by men without desire for fruit and as enjoyed by the and enjoined by the ordinance, which is the scriptures, which firm faith. See how these two things come into the equation again. Enjoined by the ordinance, scriptures, and with firm faith. That sacrifice is a duty, sattvic or pure. See how this becomes the way in which we have been talking about karma yoga in the earlier chapter number 3 and 4, how this becomes like a sacrifice is doing our duty in the way in which Bhagwan is prescribing here, without desire for the fruit, and as prescribed in the scriptures, and full of faith. This is called sattvic sacrifice. Sacrifice which is offered seeking for the fruit and for ostentation, you may know that to be a rajasic yajna. So any transaction which we do, which is looking out for the fruit of the action, interested and attached to the object of our desire, and for maybe ostentation, which means showing off, then that becomes our rajasic way of transacting in our life. Sacrifice to be tamasic, which is contrary to the ordinances in which no food is distributed, which is devoid of mantras and gifts, and which is devoid of faith. So tamasic will always see is something which is done out of ignorance, something which is done in the dullness of the mind, which is not taking into anything in account without any awareness of what is right, what is wrong, what is the right place to do it, what is the right time to do it. None of these things apply to the tamasic personality. So they keep on doing that stuff which is, even contrary to the scriptures. And where food is not distributed, what does that mean? It means that food is not shared. It is taken to be only for myself. It's not distributed, and which is devoid of mantras. So they don't say the food prayers, and they don't kind of do dhanam as well, and which is devoid of faith. And this is the important bit here. You talk about shraddha. There is no shraddha in any of these things, and therefore they just kind of function in this ignorant, heedless way, which is the tamasic way of functioning in life, and especially in relationship to all the transaction. This is the way tamasic people will tend to behave. So going on to the next section, then Bhagwan is going to talk about the austerities of the body, speech, and mind, and the threefold austerities again related to the three gunas. So first of all, the worship of the gods, the twice born, the teachers, the wise, purity, straightforwardness, celibacy, non injury, these are called the austerities of the body. So, what do we mean by the austerities? Austerity really means some kind of discipline. Some discipline which is taken by the body, or it can be taken by the speech, or it can be taken by the mind. And why do we need discipline? Is because a discipline is part and parcel of our spiritual life. Spiritual life without discipline is no spiritual life at all. Because we'll see that discipline means what? Doing things with determination, dedication, devotion. And that discipline requires us to carry this out in a very systematic way, methodical way, in a planned way. And that means that we are doing these austerities in these three areas. One is with regarded to the body, and the other one is speech and the mind. Kaya mansa vacha, which means either through the body or the speech or the mind, we have to still discipline these three elements in order for us to travel on our spiritual pathway. As far as the austerity of the body is concerned, this is really about purity, straightforwardness, celibacy, non injury. These are called the austerities of the body. And then what about speech? Speech which causes no excitement, it is truthful, it is pleasant, it is beneficial, and includes the practice of the and the study of the Vedas. These constitute the austerity of speech. So now you may wonder why this is being brought in. So speech is very much a part of our expression to the world. When I sing, when I speak, when I utter anything, through the power of my speech, it is really an expression of myself. And therefore, it has to be truthful, pleasant, and beneficial. And on the other hand, it should not cause any excitement to anybody. Excitement means, it should not create tension in somebody's mind, whatever I'm saying, nor should it cause depression. Some people get very sad. You're talking about very sad things, speaking this thing to be very sad. So the speech should be truthful, it should be pleasant, and it should be beneficial to whoever I'm talking to. And the practice of the study of the Vedas. See how again the scriptures are coming back into this way of thinking about discipline and the austerities. And of course, in Sadhana Panchakam, Shankaracharya ji says the first things to start with is the study of the scriptures. Vedo nityam adhiyatam. The scriptures are always to be read. And that read means what? Not only reading, but also a reflection. And our speech should be based on the practice and the study of the Vedas. And therefore, the truth way is going to be there. The pleasantness is going to be there because if I'm practicing ahimsa, then that particular pleasantness is going to be there. The idea of being doing things for the greater good, that implies that it is going to be beneficial as well. And it's not going to excite people. Remember what Bhagwan was saying earlier, that neither are people disturbed by the this person, the seeker, nor is the seeker disturbed by other people. So we don't want to disturb anybody, not to cause excitement by our speech. So austerity of speech is very important for us as seekers of the truth. So careful what you say, in other words. Now, the serenity of the mind, good heartedness, silence, self control, purity of nature, these together are called the mental austerity. So, what are we doing? We're controlling the body, we're controlling the speech, we're controlling the mind. And in the mind, serenity of the mind is very important. Peacefulness, inner peacefulness, good heartedness, having good emotion, good feelings towards things, silence, silence in the mind, which means the mind is not full of agitation. And this is sattvicness. Sattvicness leads to the calmness of the mind, the centeredness of the mind. It leads to self-control, and this is the purity of nature. And this is very important to take into account mental austerity by cultivating those qualities which Bhagwan has already guided us into. And this gives us this mental austerity, which consists of all these things. So the threefold austerity practiced by steadfast men with utmost faith, desiring no fruit, they are called sattvic. So all the disciplines, steadfast men, which means that it is a determination, it is steadfastness in terms of, established in these practices with the utmost faith. Faith, Shraddha is coming back again, and desiring no fruit for their austerities. In other words, it is done in this kind of selfless manner to attain the highest spiritual goal. This is called the sattvic austerity, and austerity which is done with the object of gaining good reception, honor, worship, hypocrisy, and done with hypocrisy. This is said to be rajasic, unstable, transitory. So austerity, which is done in this kind of way, some people do things which they want other people to appreciate. Oh, I'm doing this austerity, I'm doing this puja, this I'm doing this austerity, and so on. They want to have good reception. They want other people to praise them, and they want to be honored. They want to be worshipped themselves, and this is all done for the wrong reason, with the wrong attitude, with the wrong intention behind it. And this is why it is called rajasic. And the austerity which is practiced with self torture. out of some foolish notion for the purpose of destroying another. This is declared to be tamasic. So torture of the body, that, fasting for long periods of time without even understanding what fasting is all about, out of some foolish notion that, control of the body is going to somehow bring, a lot of powers to me, and so on and so on. And these powers I'm going to use to destroy somebody. There are people like that who think like that. They think, okay, I'm going to do a lot of austerities, and my only purpose is to destroy this person who is disturbing so much. This is really a tamasic way of doing austerities. So the threefold austerities, and if you think about discipline, do it in a balanced way, with this kind of steadfastness, with faith, utmost faith, and do it so that we are not kind of looking so much about, what is it which I'm going to gain out of these things. Just do it because it needs to be done. Do it with utmost faith, and do it in such a way that it is part and parcel of your day-to-day existence. Because if there is utmost faith, there is no way in which you're going to say, today forget about it, I'm going to start again tomorrow. This is what happens. The steadfastness is also important in terms of the sattvic austerity. And therefore, moving away from the tamasic austerities and the uh, rajasic austerities, we want to attain a sattvic austerity by these three things which Bhagwan is telling us to cultivate: steadfastness, utmost faith, and also not desiring the fruit of our actions. Now let's go to this section here, which Bhagwan then talks about dhanam. And here, this is another important aspect of our life and living. Now, gift doesn't really mean, just giving somebody money or giving a gift of some kind, physical gift. Gift is really about gifting yourself in whatever way you can for the sake of the other. Whether you're gifting time, you're gifting your talent and your skill, whether you're gifting your wealth, whatever you're gifting. See, this is a complete orientation towards the world in a very sattvic way, is that it is done as not as a kind of transactional thing, that I'm going to gift this person so that that person can give me another gift in return. It's not about that. It's about, this is my dharma. This is what I ought to be doing, is that whatever I have in this life, in this world, which I which is mine, and who I am in terms of my skills and talents and gifts, I am offering this to the world in a fit time and place, and worthy of the person to whom I am giving it, without any expectation in return. And if you think about the life of Pujya Gurudev Swami Chinmayananji, his whole life was a gift to humanity. Think about a life which is dedicated to gifting it to the whole of humanity and saying, here's my gift to you. Enjoy it because you are worthy people, and this is worthy of you. And I don't expect anything in return. I don't want anything in return. Whatever I'm giving you is for your benefit. And in Puja Gurudev's life, right up to the last breath, every breath was a teaching. It was a gift to all of us. And that is why we are sitting here discussing about Bhagavad Gita, because he brought it to us in this wonderful way. The commentaries he has written in all the Upanishads, in the Bhagavad Gita, he has given us such a gift, completely without any expectation. So gift doesn't mean just giving, some laddus to somebody. It means the gift is a much wider way of thinking about this gift, dhanam. And that gift which is given with a view to receiving something in return or looking for fruit again or given reluctantly. Should I not? Is this person really worth giving this gift to? This becomes the Rajasic way of doing the dana. So why? Because this Rajasic person is holding things back. He wants to have things for himself or herself and keep it. And we know people who are very miserly. They don't give anything out for of themselves. Even to give time, a bit of time to somebody becomes a headache for them. And to give something of a physical nature also, should I not give? And even if he has to give, he gives, in this kind of reluctant manner and hoping that he's going to get something back. So this is the Rajasic way of gifting. And then the last one, which is the tamasic one, which says wrong time, wrong place, unworthy person, without respect or with insult. Here, somebody is thrown something at them and say, get lost. And without any kind of respect, no respect. Even giving the gift, this person can insult the other person. So you can see the different ways of giving present as a gift of yourself, of your talents, of your skills, of your resources, of your material wealth, even gifting to the world in the best way possible, which is the sattvic way. So when you give something, even if it is speech which you are kind of giving, knowledge which you're giving guidance, giving advice, do it in a sattvic manner because this is the gift to the other person. And if it is done in the right way, it then purifies your mind, it takes you towards your spiritual destination. So here's the summary of the topics, and here you can kind of take your time when you get this PDF to look at these things and to see that Shraddha, Ahar, food can be done in Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic ways. And again, the yajna, sacrifice, sincerely done according to the scripture without expecting a result in a Sattvic way, Rajasic way, Tamasic way, and then Dhanam, charity, which we have just talked about. Sattvic way is sincerely given at the right time for the right reason without expectation. Rajasic is that which is reluctantly given for the sake of return and for the sake of a result. And Tamasic, given without respect, undeserving, underserving, undeserving, and wrong time and place. So done totally in ignorance, as it were. So this is a good summary of the topics which Bhagwan has covered. Now, just to remember that, we may think, oh, I don't do these sacrifices. I don't do much of this dhanam. I do it once in a while. But look at the broader aspect because we are always doing these things. We are always doing some um, uh, taking in something, food, giving something out, Shraddha, faith. Where is our faith? What kind of faith is it? And to think about, the kind of transactions which we are carrying out, we have to look at it in a much wider context and see how each and every aspect of our life has been covered by these four uh, topics which Bhagwan has discussed in this chapter. And then the summary of this topic in just one table is being given here so that it kind of gives us a good chart. And if we, print it out and put it in front of us, then we'll be reminded again and again what kind of shraddha we should have, what kind of food we should be eating. Actually, a good thing to put it on the fridge so that when you open the fridge every time, we are looking at the food. This is the food I should be eating. This is the kind of sacrifice at the intellectual level, or charity, dhanam at the mental level, physical, intellectual, mental. See how Bhagwan is kind of bringing all these elements together to give a full picture. It's not just three things here and there, but full picture of how we need to have this threefold faith expressing itself in all areas of our life: physical, intellectual, and mental. So, in this last section, then Bhagwan is bringing us right back to thinking about the ordinance of the scriptures and wonderfully summarizing the whole of the concept of the scriptures in three words: Om Tat Sat. So, Om Tat Sat means what? This has been declared to be the triple designation of Brahman. Om Tat Sat. This is the triple designation of the ultimate reality, Brahman, and that was created formally the Brahmanas, the Vedas, the Yajnas, the sacrifices. In other words, all this is arising out of the ultimate truth, and that ultimate truth is expressed in the Vedas, and the ultimate truth is expressed in all the scriptures. Therefore, if we turn our attention to the scriptures and say, actually, what are the scriptures saying? What should be the basis of my pramana? What is the Shabda Praman telling me? This is a summary of it all. Om Tat Sat. And Om means what? Utterance of Om are become the acts of sacrifice, gifts, and austerity. So every time we do something, if Om is uttered, it is really that we are thinking of the scriptures when we are doing anything. The basis of our thought, word, and deed becomes Om. Whatever we are starting, we say Om mentally, and we know that we are doing it on this in on the basis of the scriptures, because Om is a summary word of all the scriptures, and always by the students of Brahman. Every seeker must start everything with Om. Whatever you're doing, Om is that which is to be uttered, and it is a summary of all the scriptures saying, here's the truth. I am functioning within the ordinance of that truth, and therefore I am orienting my mind towards sattva and the ordinance of the scriptures. Uttering tat without aiming at the fruits are the acts of sacrifice, austerity, and the various acts of gift performed by the seekers of liberation. Tat means what? That. Tattvamasi. Remember the Mahavakya? Tattvamasi. That thou art. And Om is the declaration of Brahman. Tat is about you and me as saying, I am that. Okay. And that again reminds us of um, not to aim for the fruit of our action, act in a spirit of sacrifice with the austerities and the dhanam done in the sattvic way. And if you perform it in this kind of manner with the uttering of tat, then it becomes us based on the scriptures. The word sat is used in the sense of reality and goodness. And this is a sense of an auspicious act. So sat means literally means the truth, the reality, and goodness here, so that we are operating when we use this word sat, when we utter the word Om Tat Sat, then we are actually bringing everything together: the transcendental and the transactional, the individual and the cosmic. We are bringing the truth into our thought, word, and deed. We are bringing the truth into the transaction of everything which is happening at our mental, at our speech level, and at our bodily level. All this is included in Om Tat Sat. So, steadfastness in sacrifice, austerity, and gift is also called Sat. Action in connection with these is called Sat. So, right up to the idea of Om as Brahman, to that which is the cosmic truth in ourselves as well, to the action which is taking place in terms of our connection with all these things: sacrifice, austerity, and gift. This is called Sat. See how wonderfully Bhagwan is bringing all these things in relationship to the scriptures by saying Om Tat Sat should be the basis of everything which we do in our life. Whatever is sacrificed, given, performed, whatever austerity is practiced without faith, it is called Asat. Asat is that which is not for the here or the hereafter. So set aside the asat, go towards the sat, Om Tat Sat becomes the basis of everything which we do in our life, including eating our food and doing whatever, saying whatever we do is based on this ordinance of the scriptures as described by Om Tat Sat. Okay, here we are, the conscious spiritual living. With the conclusion of the chapters, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And this is the conscious spiritual living described again and again in all the chapters: 4A's, 4B's, 4C's, and 4D's. Keep this in your mind always, and this becomes the basis of your spiritual living. What will you do now? Learn, read, reflect on the content of chapter number 17, Yoga of the Threefold Faith. So understand the nature of these three modes of faith and how they operate in lived experience in your life. Think about your faith. Important thing to remember. And how do you cultivate these sattvic forms of what Bhagwan has described to us here? Food, austerity, charity. And this is really to be thought about in the widest sense. The widest sense of food, austerity, and charity, which then includes these dimensions of our lives, so that each and every aspect of our life needs to be turned towards the sattvic forms of thinking, feeling, behaving. And as much as we do that and prepare a plan to do and cultivate this, it becomes a very spiritual life. Then to contemplate on the references to faith in relation to your spiritual life and live life given by Bhagwan in the previous chapters as well. And this can be also considered for practice, which I'm sure that you've been following all these things and continue to practice all other techniques from the previous chapters. And of course, meditation very much to be part and parcel of our daily sadhana. And with all these things, enjoy the sadhana, stay safe, and stay well. So here we come to the conclusion of chapter number 17. Thank you and Hari Om. Okay, so we will conclude with the prayers now.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्. ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय, तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय, मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय. ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते, पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते. ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. ॐ तत्सूर्यो, I can't remember now. ॐ न तत्र सूर्यो भाति न चन्द्रतारकं, नेमा विद्युतो भान्ति कुतोऽयमग्निः, तमेव भान्तमनुभाति सर्वं, तस्य भासा सर्वमिदं विभाति. बोलिए श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय.